Well, I thought we would sit down and have a little discussion about Chapter 3 in our Digital Crime and Digital Terrorism course. This chapter is about the criminology of computer crime. It focuses on the causes of digital crime, several theories about what inspires an individual or group to engage in criminal activity have emerged over the last 100 years of study. Most of those theories have been developed to explain crime in general and thus are not widely accepted as true explanations for the motivations of digital crime, but some do apply. One of the earliest crime explanation theories is called positive school theory, and that's a belief that crime-producing traits are like born within an individual, and that those factors could be isolated by psychiatrists and other professionals and treated. That was explored quite in depth and sort of fell out of favor. And thus, following that is choice theory. So, choice theory explains a person's motive as a rational choice based upon weighing the risks and benefits of committing a specific criminal act. And choice theory became popular in the late 1970s, and there are basically three reasons why. As we just mentioned, positive school theory began to be questioned as traits failed to be identified by professionals. Secondly, a spiking crime rate began to lead researchers to look in other directions for solutions. And lastly, the entire practice of rehabilitation began to be questioned. Actually, several studies concluded that all this rehabilitative efforts had very little effect on what's called recidivism. Now, recidivism is repeat offenses, returning to the criminal lifestyle. And so, with choice theory, judicial policy started to change focus onto the offense itself rather than the offender. The idea here is that to control crime, including digital crime, the offender has to fear punishment and thus be deterred from committing the act. Another theory that emerged is something called routine activities theory. And it is, again, based on the fact that people make rational choices. And in fact, routine activity theory, we could see, is often written in the literature with the acronym RAT. Okay. It was developed by Lawrence Cohen and Marcus Felsen, and it argues that the supply of offenders and the motivation to commit crime are constant. So there's this pool of offenders and there's this pool of motivation that are just always out there. And what changes is the availability of targets of opportunity. So according to routine activities theory, there is a crime when there is a convergence in time and space, of three factors. We have to have a motivated offender, a suitable target, and then the very important third thing is what's called the absence of a capable guardian or a protector. So all three factors must be present simultaneously in order for the crime to occur. RAT is applicable in our digital arena because, as we've discussed in prior classes, the promulgation of computers across the globe has just increased to huge numbers the available targets. So without adequate software protection, firewalls, access control lists, other guardians, then there are many opportunities for the pool of criminals to be successful. In addition, there are plenty of motivated offenders, particularly hackers, all over the world. Another theory is deterrence theory. And this theory is a specific manifestation of choice theory. The choice to commit a crime is based upon weighing of benefits and risks of engaging in this criminal activity. And as you might think, if the risks, that being incarceration, any form of punishment, outweigh the benefits, well, then the person will not commit the act. If the risks seem low, well, hey, the benefits outweigh those risks, and the criminal says, hey, go for it. And then we are breaking down that general deterrence theory into two types of deterrence, general and specific. So in general deterrence, the punishment or sanction is widely publicized so that would-be perpetrators will be swayed against committing the act. Perhaps even a certain or given criminal is made an example of to drive home the message. With specific deterrence, we are looking at a particular perpetrator, and when that individual is caught and convicted, presumably the punishment is so distasteful that it deters that individual from engaging in that particular behavior ever again. So we have several assumptions about deterrence theory. One is that the criminals are rational actors. That is, they make a conscious choice about their criminal act. The offenders have to be aware of the penalties. If they're clueless, well, there is no cost-benefit analysis to do. They don't even think about it. And when the risks are out there, the offenders have to view those penalties as unpleasant. The sanctions, as you can see, must be swift, certain, and severe. Moving on, there are several psychological theories regarding criminology of digital crime, including things that base their findings off of moral development, and then others dealing with personality disorders. So moral development theories assume that a person passes through different stages of development throughout their life. There are these sequential stages in moral reasoning. And at each of these stages, a person makes decisions about right and wrong at that stage's ability to reason. Kohlberg came up with 6 stages of moral development. There's the punishment and obedience stage, where the individual decides what is right due to obedience to some higher power. So picture a very small child, and they are admonished for their wrong behavior, and their goal is to avoid that punishment. Stage 2, hedonistic orientation stage, corresponds with seeing one's own needs met. That's the center. So when someone is a hedonist, they're thinking of themselves and their pleasure. This is a toddler type age group, maybe toward elementary school, where a child is developing a sense of autonomy, of being individual, and they're looking out for that individual self. Then, third is interpersonal concordance stage, where what is right is discerned as being concern for others and having good intentions. So early elementary school is about the age for this interpersonal concordance stage. Stage 4, the law and order orientation phase, usually reached during adolescence, is when right is doing one's duty to society and maintaining the rules, law and order. Then we move into the social contract or legalistic stage. And this stage and the one to follow are typically entered in early adulthood. In the social contract legalistic stage, right is based on upholding the social contract. That's the rules and values of society. So the individual needs to be aware of what they are and be socialized into that cultural group. And then the orientation to universal ethical principles stage is when right is defined by some global adherence to the golden rule. Almost every culture all around the world, regardless of particular religion, all religions have some statement that's very similar to the golden rule and the principles of justice and equality. So what issues go on here is individuals that have what we might call arrested development, and this is what happens when an individual stops moving through these stages. And many who study crime feel that this condition is a contributor to criminal behavior. Also, psychologists are arguing that there are certain personality characteristics which some individuals have that may influence crime. We call these personality disorders. Emotional or behavioral attributes of a person that may push them in the direction of criminal behavior. Sheldon and Gluck noted several personality characteristics that were conducive to crime, and you might even be able to guess these, specifically impulsivity, also being an extrovert, sort of the class clown, lack of self-control, and being very assertive. Also, in addition to those, there are some other personality characteristics conducive toward crime, including someone who's constantly suspicious of others, destructiveness, someone who chronically feels under or unappreciated, and an ambivalence toward authority. There is a condition, we call it antisocial personality disorder, and is defined by 6 or 7 criteria, repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest, just can't seem to avoid it, deceitfulness, impulsivity, irritability, a reckless disregard for safety. They're irresponsible and often show no remorse. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association states it this way, quote, "The essential feature of antisocial personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others that begins in childhood or early adolescence and continues to adulthood." Also, psychological theory has attempted to explain the illness we call pedophilia. And pedophilia, as you know, is a crime against children perpetrated by those with a severe behavioral disorder. It's likely that the perp has some kind of severe mistreatment themselves in their youth. They often abuse children as some kind of a power play to assert their own authority. But the specific reasons why a person becomes a pedophile are really not fully understood, and there's some argument back and forth. Did the digital arena entice the individual and they became a pedophile, or did they have pedophilia tendencies and then the access to material on the internet feed that further? So, as originally developed, there were also social structure theories. And social structure theories are those that attempt to explain criminal behavior based on a person's social class or their cultural values. One of those is called strain theory. And strain theory was proposed by a fella whose name is Robert Merton, and based on the premise that the goal of American and Eastern European cultures is economic success, material wealth, and that grew into saying happiness equals wealth. Okay. And not all persons have equal access to the means of obtaining this economic success, and thus are strained to achieve it by other means, possibly illegal ones. The goal, this economic success, is usually reached through some agreed upon avenue, education, and then being able to get into a job and then get promotions and succeed in that occupation, and often be able to defer immediate gratification, i.e. study instead of going to a party, work late at the office rather than, leaving right at 5 and going out for drinks. So those that succeed can adhere to those qualities. Another name for strain theory is blocked opportunity theory, because in the big scheme of things, it's basically saying that the strain is because the opportunity was blocked. So Merton's 5 modes of adaptation include conformity, ritualism, innovation, retreatism, and rebellion. Conformity accepts the cultural goal of economic success and also accepts the norms to achieve that goal, i.e., to get the education, to defer immediate gratification. Ritualism rejects the cultural goal but accepts the norms. So perhaps the person lowers their expectations about really how successful they need to be, but they're still falling in line with the education and holding down a job, etc. In the innovation mode, the individual accepts the cultural goal of economic success, but rejects the accepted means to obtain the goal. Those would be the type of people that might engage in we call alternative means of making their money, like money laundering or other white-collar crimes. Retreatism rejects the cultural goal of economic success and also rejects the cultural norms. So they're sort of like they drop out. And then rebellion rejects both the cultural goal of economic success and the cultural norms, but with a twist here, they substitute new goals and new norms. That might be the gang life, street crime, etc. So again, those white-collar crimes such as money laundering, auction fraud, and even corporate espionage might fall within the formulation of strain theory probably in this innovation phase. There's also something called generalized strain theory that applies to those of any social class, and they confront this strain as sort of anything they can't handle in their life. So, for instance, individuals who are jilted in a relationship or rejected in a social group can feel intense anger over this and lash back with bullying, cyber stalking, and other types of attacks, even deadly attacks. Give you a minute to absorb this. We really just talked about the white collar crime and also general strain theory. Agnew argues that crime is due to negative affective stages, including, yes, frustration, depression, disappointment, anger, and this is regardless of social class. So social process theories are those that focus on the relationship between how a person socializes and crime. These theories examine family relationships, peer groups, school dysfunction perhaps, and as these relate to criminal behavior. Individuals who associate with criminals, not surprisingly, are at a higher likelihood of committing a crime themselves. Those who grow up in broken homes or unnurturing families are at somewhat a greater risk of drifting to criminal behavior. Learning theory is something that falls under this social process theory, where individuals learn criminal behavior by associating in an environment where that behavior is seen as appropriate. So if a person, young or old, falls into some peer group where crime is just a natural part of that group, they learn the skills, rationales, and attitudes that further the belief that the crime is okay. Sutherland developed something called differential association theory, arguing that criminal behavior is a function of learning and not an inability to obtain economic success. The economics are sort of out of the picture. He presented 9 formal propositions that demonstrate that social interaction and learning leads to criminal behavior. And I'll just leave the slides up here momentarily, and you can read through them. And we'll take a look at Akers' social learning theory, because Sutherland did not explain how behavior is learned. Akers attempts to do this with his theory, grounded in 4 principal components: association, definitions, differential reinforcement and imitation. And then we've got Sykes and Matza that argue that the process of becoming a criminal is a learning experience. So this neutralization or drift theory holds that many criminals actually hold more conventional morals, values, beliefs, but learn to neutralize them. And this neutralization shields the criminal from their sense of guilt or any kind of obligation towards society. These techniques of neutralization, or which allow the perpetrator to drift into a criminal life, consists of 5 techniques. First is the denial of responsibility. So you might hear people say, I didn't mean to do it, or I had no choice. So their behavior was beyond their control. Secondly, denial of injury. They deny that the wrongfulness of the act was even there. Hey, no harm, no foul. I didn't actually hurt anybody, you might hear. 3, denial of victimness. That's when the perpetrator denies that there really was a victim at all. Well, things you might hear were, they're awful, they had it coming to them. Number 4, condemnation of the condemners, is a technique that shifts the focus to those probably in authority, explaining why their point of view holds hollow. Words that might evoke this condemnation of condemners would be, what I'm doing is nothing. They're the hypocrites. Or, why is everybody picking on me? And lastly, appeal to higher loyalties would occur when the perpetrator's peer group takes precedence over the rules of society. You would hear explanations like, well, I'm not doing this for myself, I'm doing it for my pals here. So there are many, many theories, there are many attempts to explain why an individual enters into criminal endeavors, and I hope you had some good takeaways from this discussion, and that reading in the book and scouring through some external articles online, perhaps some YouTube videos will help you as well.